think I'm just gonna go ahead and make this personal YouTube channel just a Blue Giant shrine. Like, I'm literally only coming on here to talk Blue Giant, so why not? Let's do this. What's up, guys? It's Alvin again, and yes, we are back to talk about Blue Giant again, but this time we're going to be talking about the anime film, which just had its North American release this past October, for October, I believe, 8th and 9th. I'm recording this over like a month after the release, almost a month after, just because I've been so busy with life stuff. But I really wanted to take time to just give a quick review and just like my general thoughts about the film. Just because if you've seen my previous Blue Giant video where I'm reviewing the manga series, you'd know that this is a very beloved property of mine. I genuinely loved reading the Blue Giant manga series, and the only reason I got exposed to the manga series is because I knew about this movie coming, which was released in Japan this past February of 2023. So now that I finally got the chance to watch this movie after what felt like an eternity of waiting for this release, I gotta say, this movie definitely knocks it out of the park. First and foremost, there's not enough promotion for this film. Like, the only reason I even caught the release of this film is because my girlfriend sent me a random post from G Kids on Instagram about this release. And mind you, this Instagram post came the weekend of the release. So we only had Saturday and Sunday, or rather Sunday and Monday, to watch it. And we had to quickly get on these tickets because she knows how much I love this series. And, you know, I didn't expect for a huge turnout for this movie at all. Like, the auditoriums were filled by the time I reached for those tickets. And that just gave me some perspective as to how sizable the fan base is. No, it's not as massive as something like Dragon Ball or My Hero or Jujutsu Kaisen, but to see those auditoriums filled for those 2 nights, it really goes to show that there is a hunger for stories like this, and it was super exciting. And I really wish there was more time to have this movie released in theaters, because a lot of people are really missing out on a really fun and touching story. For those of you who've come to this video and have no idea what I'm talking about, Blue Giant revolves around a story of a young boy in Japan named Dai Miyamoto, who decides one day he's going to be the greatest jazz player of all time. So he picks up a saxophone, plays really hard, turns out he's amazing at it. And the movie actually starts with Dai heading to Tokyo, leaving his hometown behind, and starting a new jazz trio with his best friend from his hometown and this new kid who's a piano genius but is super arrogant. And together they basically go out into the world of jazz in Tokyo. They see how cutthroat it is, and it's very questionable whether or not they can make it as a trio in a music industry that is not even profitable anymore. It's a dying industry. So there's a lot at stake for these young kids who are putting their all into their music. And that is basically the premise of the movie and the manga series. So I know right off the bat people are probably going to be like turned off by the concept of jazz. There's not a lot of people who are really turned on by that, which I totally get, even though I myself am a huge jazz lover. It's one of the first genres I've been exposed to as a kid, and I've never stopped loving it. And there's actually a lot of merit to a story like this, where we're following some young kids trying to pursue a dream in a genre that's really not lucrative. Like, they could easily have gone to like doing hip hop or pop music or anything else that's super trendy and super lucrative, but they are following what they're passionate about, and that makes the story very earnest and very interesting to watch. Our director for this film is Yuzuru Tachikawa, who, if the name sounds familiar to you, he has directed series such as Mob Psycho 100, which, fantastic series, also underrated. Also directed Death Parade, which, if you have not seen that one, definitely check it out. And I there's got to be a season 2. I wish there was a season 2, but there's not. But it's fine. The movie's written by Number 8, which honestly I don't know if that's a team of writers or just a moniker for one guy. We also have, of course, the author of the manga himself, Shinichi Shizuka, credited as a writer for the story as well. And of course we have beautiful, legendary music composed by the Japanese jazz pianist Hiromi Uehara, who I've honestly only been exposed to because of this soundtrack, and I'm looking forward to digging deep into her discography. We really only follow three main cast members. We have Dai Miyamoto, Yukinori Sawabe, the pianist, and we have Shunji Tamada, who is Dai's best friend who decides to pick up the drums for the first time and join this group, which adds even more tension and more at stake to the story. So getting into the movie itself, I can go ahead and say that I adore this film adaptation. I didn't know fully what to expect just because the story is based on the first 10 volumes of the manga series. So when I saw that they were going to do a film, I just thought, that's interesting. I feel like there's too much material to fit that into a movie. I figured it would have gone to be a TV series. That's not the case because the movie basically does away with the first couple of volumes in the manga series where we follow Dai in his hometown of Sendai. We actually start the movie off at the midpoint of the volumes where he leaves his hometown to go to Tokyo to start his jazz career. And I thought that was actually a really tasteful and smart way of just adapting the story, only because the first 3 to 4 volumes, we really don't see a plot developing. We see Dai growing as a jazz musician. You see him go through his trials and tribulations of learning how to maintain a saxophone, learning how to play, how to solo and learning theory, and then learning how to play with other members without being so loud and overpowering. That content doesn't really make for a movie narrative, so it might bug some people, but I mean, based on the crowd that we've had, everybody loved the movie and nobody seemed to complain about that edit. And I think it's definitely a wise choice that they just decided to do away with the Sendai story and just start right where Tokyo begins, because that's really where the plot starts. That's where things are at stake for these characters. We're trying to see if they can become a famous, popular jazz trio that can make it into a jazz career. So I think that was like the first main standout of the movie that absolutely was a positive for me. The characters feel so lively too. Like right off the bat, we get a sense of Dai's personality and who he's like, or what he's like rather. And we see that he's a very earnest kid. He's a very good, genuine person from his interactions with his best friend, Tamada. And we see right away that he is passionate about playing his saxophone. I mean, the minute he steps out of the bus in Tokyo, he doesn't even go to an apartment. He doesn't have an apartment. He just starts looking for a practice space out in public because he loves playing the saxophone in an open area. So he doesn't really find a place to live until he just runs into his friend Tamada and asks him, hey, can I crash at your place for a while? And basically just becomes his roommate. Like, he just moved to Tokyo without even a plan with like living situation or a job. He just came with a saxophone and his clothes. Like, it's so hilarious. It's ridiculous. But that shows you that he's very motivated and very laser focused on this goal, that sometimes other important things tend to fall by the wayside. So he needs help in that regard. And that's where Tamada comes in, and he is basically a no-nonsense character. He's always on Dai's ass about making sure that, that he has a stable job so that he can take care of himself, making sure that he can bring in income if he's going to be staying at his place because he's going to need rent to get paid. And very quickly, we see their dynamic of, you can tell that they've had a lived friendship before the movie started. And I'm glad that the movie doesn't try to waste time trying to keep us up and catch us up with that history. They just show you how they behave with each other, and their conversations with each other and how they act with each other really does inform you of their history, and it informs you that they are very close friends. And then the character of Yukinori, as soon as he's introduced, you can tell right away what kind of character he is. Again, they do a very good job of keeping us up to speed without having to have so many other interactions go on. We see that Yukinori is a very arrogant, a very cocky, but also a very gifted piano player. He grew up playing piano as a child. He isn't like Dai, where he had just picked it up 3 or 4 years ago. And Yukinori quickly throws a wrench in the mix of this when he brings up a philosophy of, musicians who are successful, they have to be gifted and they have to have perfect technique, and Dai is on the opposite end where he feels that you don't have to be a genius and you don't have to be a prodigy in order to succeed in music. All you have to do is play for fun and play for passion and love what you're doing. So those two butt heads while Tamada is in the middle of everything, which puts us in the headspace of the everyday person watching this movie, just trying to understand the world of jazz through these two hot-headed characters with very differing philosophies. And I think that created a great dynamic in the group where you see camaraderie with them, but then you also see conflict with them throughout the story. The world of jazz is also fully realized in this anime film. Like, how do you picture the jazz world in Japan? You know, North Americans aren't gonna like have a clear imagination or a clear picture in their head of what that looks like. So the way that they depict jazz musicians in Japan feels very like authentic and earnest in a way that just feels believable. You see that a lot of musicians, they're not really succeeding in terms of their career. They're playing at nightclubs and bars, and they're not like selling out these huge concerts the way that you would see for like a hip hop artist or a rock band or a pop artist. They play at local spots, and each local spot has a different degree of presence, atmosphere. There's like, you know, there's clubs where like anybody can go into, and then there's like clubs that have a level of exclusivity where you have to have, you know, a certain amount of money to get in, or you have to be of a certain level of playing in order to perform for this club. And that's where we start seeing their first materialized goal of wanting to play at the most famous, most popular nightclub for jazz, which is called So Blue. If they can make it in there and impress the audience and impress some important people, they could potentially actually start recording albums and do this professionally. When we get into the story, I gotta say, it's both heartwarming and gut-wrenching at the same time, and you just do not expect that based on just like the trailers that you see, or even seeing like the manga images. Like, you don't expect anything like this to have any sort of heartbreak involved, because the covers always look lively and fun, but when stuff gets heavy, it gets heavy. And I'm not going to spoil what goes on in the movie. I want people to go into this blind, because I feel like that is the best way to go into the story. I didn't know what to expect just from picking up the first manga series. And even then, after reading all that, I did not know what to expect with the movie, with the execution of the story. There's lots of pure joy that comes out of this movie. Like, the audience was electric. Like, whenever something joyful and exciting happened, you felt it in people's reactions, when people gasp, when people are like, you know, bobbing their heads to the music. And me and my girlfriend were watching a performance in the movie, and we see this guy's head just like bobbing really like intensely, like he was really like enjoying the music. And then when something really sad happens, you hear people react to that audibly as well. And I did not expect that in this movie at all. This was almost as lively as going to those Marvel movies, you know, back in the heyday before Endgame came around. Like, you would hear people's excitement. It's so weird to like experience that in a movie about an anime involving jazz. It's so cool. Guys, go watch this. All right, so let's get into the music, because that is really the meat and potatoes of this story. If the music doesn't even blow you away in any regard, you're really not selling this movie. Like, you're talking about a character who says he wants to be the best jazz player in the world. In the world, not just Japan, in the world. And you have some hard-hitting legends already in the world of jazz, all right? You got your Coltrane, you got Thelonious Monk, you've got, you know, Herbie Hancock, you've got Chick Corea, and for anyone who's not a jazz fan, I'm speaking another language to you. I get it, I understand, but think of like legends in your favorite genre of hip hop or pop or rock. There are people cemented in that legendary status in the jazz world. So the music here coming from Dai and his group needs to hit hard, and man, does it hit hard. I couldn't help myself but listen to the soundtrack on YouTube. And I was blown away by the music. It was gorgeous. It was so fun. It was intense. It was passionate. But now hearing the album in the context of these animated performance was just on a galactic level, like quite literally. Like the animation, it's so crisp. It's so gorgeous. Whenever these characters perform and get on stage, whether it's good or bad, you feel the energy of that scene. Their first performance was actually quite bad. Like it's canon to the manga series, but when we finally first hear this band perform together for the first time at this mostly empty club of like maybe 3 guests, it is like the roughest sounding performance you could hear. It sounds worse than like the demos that you would hear that would be released way later in life when an album like performs like crazy and they decide to put out like the demo versions to see how the sound came out before it got polished. This sounded worse. Their first performance was very shaky, and it's mainly because poor Tamada, the beginner drummer, is having a really hard time keeping up with the time of the music once Dai and Yukinori get into their soloing. He starts panicking, he freezes on the drums, you hear the stutter of the drums, and you hear also that the piano and saxophone are not fully focused because they're so busy trying to accommodate and adjust for Tamada's shortcomings. And you see the characters like facial reactions, how it's just like a mixture of like disdain, but then also there's still like some level of people being impressed by the performance, and that is mainly because of Dai's performance on the saxophone and Yukinori's beautiful playing of the piano as well. Even in that cacophony of messiness of that first performance, you still see glimmers of genius, basically. And they emphasize that, and that even though that's like winning moments for Dai and Yukinori, that makes Tamada feel really bad because he is a beginner and he wants to prove himself in this trio, and he's already off to a bad start. And you could feel the tension in the movie theater audience. Like I heard some people kind of like going like, ooh, and I was one of them. I was probably one of the most expressive people in the crowd. So when you had moments like that, you could hear it in the audience, and the movie made you feel that secondhand embarrassment of seeing this trio kind of flopping on their first performance. And then when you get to performances later on, when they're polished, when they're more practiced and more seasoned, oh man, it was like being at a concert. Like I'm so appreciative of this movie taking the time to give us full performances of some of these songs. I'm so glad we don't have moments of like cutting away from the music or cutting it short, because I feel like that would be a disservice to listening to jazz specifically, because it's such an instrumental genre. And I'm talking literally, it's heavily instrumental. We don't have vocals. It's very uncanny to people who are not familiar with jazz. So for us to be able to focus on the performances and not break away from that at all, I think really added to the movie's enjoyment factor. Because man, when the characters are doing it well with their music, it is spectacular. The music is even better than when I first listened to it on YouTube, with the context of them performing, with the gorgeous sweeping animations of each character performing their instrument. And it and it livened the crowd too. Like the really great performances, again, we saw people tapping their hands, bobbing their heads. People genuinely were like audibly gasping and also like cheering at the end of each performance. And I'm just like, man, that's how I know this is a really good freaking movie. Like again, point to me to another jazz film that makes a crowd go wild, especially in the context of an animated film. Like it's insane. It's so freaking amazing. That the music completely sells. Like they nailed it. They absolutely freaking nailed it. And I could not be more happy with that. Jumping back to the animation real quick, I've mentioned a couple things that I really liked. I loved how the animation was very, again, there's like dynamic camera movements. Like you'd see the camera sort of circle around characters, or go like at one point it goes into like Dai's instrument and then just it just becomes this very impressionistic, colorful, um, environment that's just so surreal and so metaphysical, and it encapsulates the feeling of these players putting their everything into this music, and it captures the feeling of the audience in this film, and gives you these dynamic imageries, or this dynamic imagery that you couldn't capture in a live action setting. I mean, this movie probably could have been fine as a live action film, but the beauty of anime is in its exaggeration of expression and emotion, whether it's how the characters act or how something is animated. And man, it's just the animation aspect of it really, really mattered, because you really had to feel the intensity of these performances and the mind state of these characters as well. And the character designs were beautiful as well. They stayed true to the character designs in the manga series. The manga series has like this kind of like late 90s, early 2000s aesthetic of the characters. They're fairly simply designed, and they feel like actual real people that you would bump into on the street. Like, they don't have really crazy cool like hair colors or hairstyles. Like, they're fairly tame character designs, which I really enjoyed. The only thing that really gave me pause in the movie is the CGI sections. There's quite a few, especially when they're performing. Now, my girlfriend says otherwise. She thought it was gorgeous to look at, and she thought that it really emphasized the movements of these characters, which that is the end goal of the CG animation sections. Is these designers, they want to be able to give more dynamic movements to these characters that may not be able to be achieved through 2D hand-drawn style. But for me, this was one of those cases where the CGI just didn't mesh and blend very well with the rest of the environment. It definitely felt like the CGI that you would see from like the 2000s up until like 2010s, where they're still trying to figure out how to blend this all together, and it just didn't quite work for me. They just kind of look like stiff blobs sometimes, and it just didn't blend well with the other hand-drawn environments that they were surrounded by. But it didn't take me out of the movie. It didn't make the movie any less enjoyable. I really only liked the animation when it was in 2D style. I felt like there was enough dynamic movement in that. And I'll give the CG some credit. Like, there were some like micro expressions or even micro movements of characters, like somebody adjusting their seating while playing piano. Like, that's not something you could easily capture with just a 2D model. So I appreciated seeing that. They just gotta tighten the CG a little bit. It's come a long way. Like with other anime series like Demon Slayer and Attack on Titan, CGI has been getting very much improved with blending in with the 2D environments, but wasn't quite nailing it for me in this film. But that's fine. Again, did not take me out of the movie. Overall, this movie is just, God, it is a gem. It is a gem, and it is a shame that we do not have enough time in the movie theaters for this. It really should have been at least a week or two of a limited release, because 2 days is just not enough to get that out there. And I wonder if it's just because there just hasn't been a big enough budget to promote. This movie is a very obscure, very niche sort of story. Blue Giant isn't something in the likes of a Studio Ghibli film or something like Suzume. This is definitely something that's more niche. It's not going to grab as many people as something more popular like a shonen series. But at the same time, like, you don't know until you try. Like, there's so many movies that have been sleeper hits that nobody expected to come and just taking away the box office until the movie came out and word of mouth spread. I really feel like if this movie had its due time in the movie theaters, I think enough word of mouth would have got out for people to really come out and see this. Just based on the little sample size of the 2 days that it was released, I checked my AMC app just to see what different theaters look like. Almost every one of them were fully booked. Like, the only seats that were available were the neck breaker seats. Obviously, nobody's going to want to take those seats. But if those seats were adjusted to a comfortable setting, those seats would have been gone too. So I really hope that if it's not going to get another release in theaters, at the very least, make it available for streaming and for Blu-ray for everyone to be exposed to this story, because again, it's a really fun, really emotional story. Again, I don't want to get into specifics, but I know that I've talked a lot about like the jazz aspect of it and the performance aspect of it, but what the characters go through is very relevant to what anybody goes through in terms of finding your place in the world when you're stuck doing something that you don't want to do, and you clearly have an idea of what you want to do, or maybe you don't know what you want to do and you just want to spend time with a hobby that you really enjoy. This is a story that is very relatable to anybody. Even if you're not a musician, even if you're not a jazz lover, you will be blown away by this movie. You will enjoy this music somehow, and you're going to enjoy this ride that you take along with these characters. You're going to fall in love with this trio who, they don't have it figured out. They're teenagers, and we've all been there as teenagers and young adults who are trying to make our way into this world, not knowing exactly what we want to do, but we know we want to do something great, whether for the world or just for ourselves. It really is a relatable, touching, and just really fun story to take in, and it'll really make you think about your own life and how you want to improve in your life. And I think that's the beauty of this movie, is at the end of the day, it is a story of self-improvement. It is about jazz. It is about becoming the greatest jazz player. But it's also more than that. It's also about, how do I become a better person? Whether it's with your work, your creative endeavors, or just how you treat people. It touches on all of that stuff. And I really think if you give this movie a shot, you'll come away with something that will really touch you to your soul. And you know, you may not be as passionate as me, but I think you will enjoy this. Like, you don't understand. I cried by the end of this movie, and I'm not going to tell you where, at what point, but I did cry during this movie. And there was a lot of people that got emotional during this movie, and it makes me wonder. It makes me wonder how many of these people read the manga and how many of them are just complete newcomers who maybe like anime or like jazz or just like a new type of story they haven't seen before. I wish I took the time to get to know people outside of the auditorium just to see what kind of demographic we got there. But clearly it was an anime like fan base, but I'm curious to see what other kinds of people would be interested in a movie like this. So those are basically all my general thoughts about this movie. I could talk about this for hours, but I don't have the space for that. I do have a podcast with my girlfriend, though, if you want to check it out, called The Most Potato Podcast. I'll enter that somewhere here on the screen, and the description down below as well, where we get together and just review all the movies that catch our interest and just have very in-depth discussions about it, and try to have listeners join in on the discussion as well. So if you want like a full, in-depth, detailed, spoiler-filled review of the movie, we do have that at the Most Potato Podcast. So feel free to check us out over there and give us a like and a follow. All right, so enough of the shameless plug. That has been my review of the Blue Giant film. I hope you guys had a chance to watch. If you did, definitely comment below and just leave your thoughts there. I'm really curious to see what people thought of this movie, just because there's not enough people in my life who know about this, and I don't have people to talk to about this. Well, now I finally have my girlfriend, because now she got to watch the movie. But yeah, I just want to put this conversation out there and really get this story out there for people to take notice and maybe take a look at it. And yeah, just leave your comments down below. Let me know what you thought, if you loved it or if you didn't love it. I'm curious to see all aspects, all perspectives of this movie. And yeah, that's basically it. And I guess until the next Blue Giant related thing drops, I'll see you guys later. Bye.